So I fight for a father I never loved, against a brother that I did. I defend an empire that never wanted me, against an army that would have taken me in a heartbeat.
Warriors of Chogoris, brothers of the great tribe, the Star Hunt calls you. Do you not hear it? The battle's red edge is your home, the respect of your kinsmen, your hurt. Plunge into the enemy's breast like a blade, cut out his heart, and you will know fulfillment. The Emperor has given us strength. In return, we give him victory.
The overlooked barbarian, the Warhawk, the Great Khagan, the untrusted but yet respected Primarch of the 5th Legion, the White Scars, Jagatai Khan, a figure of mystery, whose legacy as the reclusive conqueror has echoed for over 10,000 years, overlooked by his brothers, by his Imperium, and those who fell into the trap of failing to look below the surface. The choices and decisions of this so-called barbarian Primarch shaped humanity forever. But who is the man behind the Warhawk? Who is underneath the mystery of the Great Khagan? Who is the man, Jagatai, and what shaped him? His story begins at the end of the 30th millennium. A gestation capsule was hurtling through the warp. Claws and teeth scratched upon its reinforced surface as creatures of nightmare and madness tried to get to the prize within. Re-emerging back into real space, the battered capsule was interfered with. Divine hands took it within its clutches as it hurtled towards the grey, desolate world of Chemos. The capsule was redirected, its fate changed forever, as this mysterious entity swapped it with another, directing the burning treasure towards a new destination. The capsule began to enter a planet's atmosphere, hurtling down with all the grace and violence of a falling star, roaring and crashing into the earth. Amidst the smoke and fire, a child crawled out from the wreckage. Opening his eyes for the first time, he looked up to the azure skies. No fear or terror gripped him, only confusion. This child was special. He began to adapt, rationalize, and comprehend his surroundings at a speed and depth that was beyond an ordinary human. Alone, with no sense of who or what he was, the child began to wander his new temperate home. Deep within the Yasan sector of the galaxy, on a world dominated by lush greenery, soaring mountains, and azure seas, and great plains, this unique child wandered the planet of Mundus Planus, Chogoris, a world with a singular, vast continent. Chogoris was a world home to a human civilization that had suffered the devastating consequences of Old Night, the collapse of the galaxy-spanning civilization of mankind. For thousands of years, war storms had ravaged the sector, isolating Chogoris from the wealth and resources of its neighbouring worlds. Knowledge, power, and wealth bled until humanity had regressed. The sword, bow, and rudimentary black powder weapons ruled this feudal world. It would be to the far west, deep inside the vast steppe lands known as the Empty Quarter, that the child began to roam. At the banks of the Kuon River, the young boy caught his first glimpses of humanity. He saw a tribalistic people, his superhuman mind registering their weapons, their horses, all the information he could gather, but yet distinctly lacking an understanding of the people he was looking at. Ong Khan, the leader of his Talskar tribe, stared back at this seemingly helpless boy, and he knew immediately there was something different about him. His very presence inspired awe, but most distinctly was there fire in his eyes. Khan declared that this child was a gift from the gods, and he took in this young boy, giving him shelter, food, a family, and a name, Jaghatai. The Talskar shared everything with Jaghatai. He was taught everything of their ways, their lifestyles, and the morality of tribal life. Honor to the tribe, honor to the land, and honor to the Storm Seers, the Zadrin Aga, the shamans who guided and preserved the traditions of the tribe, as well as being an invaluable advisor in the matters of the gods and the powers bestowed upon them, and the lessons of control, lest the Yaksha, the demons, punish your pride and arrogance. The young Jaghatai began to grow quickly. Even his intellect and strength was progressing so fast, he would best even the adults in combat, and match and even outwit the wisdom of the Storm Seers. Jaghatai learned everything his people could give him, but most importantly was their spirit. On horseback, roaming the vast plains, the azure skies above, the sun on his face, feeling the adrenaline flowing as the wind hit his face, hunting, fighting off rival tribes, drinking the fermented milks and wine of his people. It was freedom, uncaged, that sensation of staring at a sunset, feeling in tune with the world. What would you give for that feeling? Jaghatai was special. His strength, his intellect, his ability to understand and adapt was frightening. Even being in his presence for the first time was overwhelming, but behind this prominent form was a young boy who pondered. Rival steppe tribes began to fear him because of this seemingly superhuman warrior who began to preach and talk what was beyond the constant warfare that dominated life on the steppes. The young Talskar warrior sent from the gods was a figure of awe and a conjurer of jealousy. But Jaghatai's fast-paced, freedom-filled existence wouldn't last, and it would soon change forever. His father, Khan, was dead, killed by the Talskar's rivals, the hated Kurayade tribe. A rage so apocalyptic in its release gripped Jaghatai. He screamed for vengeance. The young man, barely a few years old, but at the same height of his elders, gathered his people. As the greatest Talskar warrior, he'd led them to war, attacking the Kurayade tribe and razing it to the ground, killing every man, woman, and child in a cacophony of swift, brutal vengeance, taking the Kurayade Khan's head and mounting it upon his tent, as the Talskars swore fealty to their new leader, Jaghatai Khan. This brutality of tribal life was the other side to all that he loved about it. The vengeance was complete, tribal honor restored, but as the anger began to fade, the quiet, pondering boy was not happy. It was a waste, this pointless inner tribal conflicts. The spirit of Chogoris was within him. He loved to fight. He loved the rush of the wind. They all did. The people of the steppe. They were brothers, all of them. Perhaps it was a philosophy created in his superhuman mind, or perhaps it was in the blood. Jaghatai Khan and his Talskars rode out, clashing with the other warring tribes. A combination of the brilliant strategies and exceptional prowess of Jaghatai broke their enemies. One by one, they were all defeated. The tribes of Helun, the Kilhan, Hauljar, Sezjak, and the High Zur, all at the feet of this new Khan, did not find death, but they were welcomed like brothers, absorbed into Jaghatai's family, welcomed as Talskars, a fate unheard of in the millennia of brutal tribal warfare. The Malthuli, the irresistible force, bowed to their Khan. Each splinter unit led by men who were promoted based on meritocracy, ending the old feudal ways of inheritance. Tribes that had warred, killed, and stolen from each other for centuries found themselves fighting side by side, riding in the saddle as one force, one army, one people. They bled together, drank together, and followed the vision of Jagatai Khan together, an unstoppable brotherhood of warriors. Imagine standing before the Khan, how earth-shattering his presence felt, how your admiration and respect flowed from the acknowledgement of his prowess and his greatness, the man who had bound your people together, each clan fingers in a curled fist that smashed your enemies apart. It would be this great growing horde that would draw the attention of more dangerous foes. To the east, outside the empty quarter, lie great kingdoms and empires, feudal civilizations with black powdered weapons and high walls. Greatest of all was the Palatine, an emperor to a corrupt empire, whose packs of greedy, self-absorbed nobles would often roam the edges of the steppe lands, hunting and attacking the tribal people for sport. 10 summers after his arrival on Chogoris, as his tribe moved to their winter settlements, a vast avalanche caught Jagatai off guard, and he and his personal guard were swallowed up by the rushing snow. Alone, Jagatai survived, his loyal brothers all dead, and just as how he had arrived on Chogoris, he was again alone. It was in his journey to return to his people that Jagatai was attacked by a Palatine aristocratic hunting band. The arrogant men underestimated the tribal savage before them. It would be their last mistake, as Jagatai tore them limb from limb, fighting with blinding speed and aggression. One lone survivor returned, bearing a note from Jagatai declaring that the people of the steppes were no longer the Palatine's toys, alongside the severed head of a man who was the Palatine's very own son. The enraged Emperor of the East assembled an enormous force. Men clad in heavy steel with guns marched to Jagatai's home, but found not a pathetic gathering of tribes in simple girths, but a well-disciplined, motivated horde. The Mathuli strode out, and utilizing the speed of an entire mounted force, they tore the armored warriors apart, showering arrows as if the very heavens rained death. The force was utterly annihilated. The men of the East had tried to destroy them, their homes, their culture, their way of life, but Jagatai wouldn't let that happen. In the wake of this glorious victory, the superhuman young man became the Kagan, the Khan of Khans of the Empty Quarter, the rightful ruler of all of its people. Men such as Tagatai Yasuge, Qin Shah, Gyu Hun, and Hasek, friends and brothers who had been by his side, followed their Kagan out of the Empty Quarter, the dust gathering at their feet as they set out to conquer the world. Kingdoms and empires over decades began to fall. Cities would look out to find this disciplined horde outside their gates. They were offered one chance to surrender or be destroyed. The example of that refusal was a warning others dared not to repeat. Each king and emperor he slew, Jagatai became more and more disgusted with them, how fat, lazy, and corrupted they had become. The obscene displays of wealth, the utter weakness of it all. Great cities, towering structures, temples, and very kingdoms fell. And after decades of war, Jagatai finished it, mounting the Palatine's emperor's head over his tent. His conquest was complete, but peace never lasts. Far upon the horizon, in Chogoris' azure skies, a golden-eagled stormbird descended from the sky. Jagatai's life was about to change forever.
When explanations are hard to produce, lie after lie comes shining through. Truth gets locked away, for reasons only known to yourself. Truth may hurt, but the lie hurts more. One lie to cover another. What was the first lie? Can you remember? So much hurt, and too many lies. What's the truth? Will I ever know? Can I ever separate the two?
The Khan remained static, like one of those age-darkened statues that stalked the shadows of that place. He saw rows of them against the far wall, each cowled and bearing a staff, mirror images of the living fossil that addressed him now.
I have conquest in my blood,
The Primarch said.
I have always hungered for it. Only now I know that you planted the desire there. You made me as an instrument of your own designs.
We are all instruments.
Except for him.
Oh no, very much him.
The Sigillite placed his thin hands together.
Listen, I understand the problem. You are monarchs of your worlds, and now we ask you to fight for this one. You were never given the tutelage we had planned, and so the wrench is sudden. If we could postpone the crusade for 100 years in order to prepare you adequately, we would do so, but we cannot. For we race against the closing door of fate. All must be gathered in. But remember this, you are a son of Terra. You were made here.
I was made on Chogoris.
The Sigillite smiled.
I should put that keening self-pity behind you if you wish to earn the allegiance of your new army.
The Khan turned on him, unclasping his arms as if he wished to draw his blade.
It is all a lie.
He said fervently.
Every part of it. Will be burning their temples and executing their priests in return for 1,000,000 worlds. All as ignorant as beasts. Is that what you wanted?
It is necessary.
We could tell them the truth.
Do not be foolish.
The Khan's lips curled in disgust.
So much contempt for your own species.
Yes, contempt.
Snapped the Sigillite.
If you had seen what I have seen, watched what a human may become when left alone in the dark, you would share it.
He collected himself.
You were lucky, Jagatai. Your world was no Caliban. We tell you of old night and you barely believe us, but that is not how most places were. The lie is noble. It is there to protect, to guard, not to deceive, for they are not ready.
The Khan turned away, stalking further into the shadows. There were other tombs there, smooth with age, the names on the surfaces impossible to read.
I have heard this before,
The Primarch said.
There were empires on my homeworld that offered freedom to their slave castes, but only when they were ready. That moment, strangely enough, never came. In the end, they had to take it for themselves, to die for it. Even then, there were some who said the day had come too soon.
He looked back at the Sigillite.
The truth will come out. You won't be able to hold the blindfold in place, and once it slips, the fury of those you deceived will be limitless.
Malkador nodded.
Which is why we rely on you, on your exceptional power, on your tactical genius. It is not enough to conquer the galaxy. You must conquer it swiftly. Bring all under the rule of the throne before the patterns of fate change and we lose this one chance. I tell you no falsehood when I say that this is everything. All depends on this. We have mere decades remaining. Just the blink of an eye set against eons to accomplish it.
The Khan smiled cynically.
And when all is finished, then we will revisit the lie.
When all is finished.
The Primarch laughed, but there was no mirth in it. He tapped an armored finger idly on the lip of one of the tombs.
I wonder some days why you gave us minds at all. Machines would have given you less grief.
Less grief, surely. less joy too.
Malcador sighed and wrapped his cloak tighter around his whip-thin body.
You have found it hard to understand your father. You wish him to be more intelligible. I understand that. But do not be seduced by the scale of his power. He has sacrificed more than any of us, and he does not use it for himself. A man may pursue a single goal and become the master of that endeavor, only to find himself weakened in all other pursuits. The Emperor battles daily with forces beyond understanding, yet you expect him to retain a mortal sympathy.
The Sigillite shook his head.
He walks the paths of eternity. Be thankful he is able to converse with you at all.
The Khan thought on that, staring pensively at the tomb.
And what is gained? If we lose, what are we? What victory is that?
The only one possible,
said Malcador.
I cannot believe it.
Then stay. Speak to him again. Listen to what he has to say.
The Khan's eyes never left the tomb. His gaze, sharp as the raptor that had given him his moniker, seemed liable to bore into the granite. A tense silence fell across the chamber, broken only by the dull hum that always came up from the distant foundations, the one that made the earth tremble and the atmosphere feel thicker than soup.
I suffocate in this place,
he said at last.
More words won't change that.
He looked up.
We already have our destination, the world he chose for us. There are enemies I will gladly slay for you. Perhaps when the hunt is underway and I have prey under my blades, I will see the truth of what you say.
There is no truth out there that cannot be perceived from here,
warned Malcador.
Then I will have to come back,
said the Khan, already restive, already moving.
Someday, when the moment is right. Not before.
A golden eagled stormbird descended from the sky, and as a procession of large, golden armored warriors made their way into Jagatai's camp, he saw that these strangers possessed technology far beyond anything on Chogoris. From his first moments of sentience, Jagatai knew that he was different, that he was more than the people around him. His intellect, his strength, and in recent years, his towering figure. Finally, the answers to that very question came as he looked upon his father, the Emperor of mankind, flanked by an equally large figure, Horus Lupercal. To stand before the Emperor is akin to glaring into the heart of a fire, warm and blinding, but with an added sense of welling majesty and wonder. Such perfection, such soul-wrenching glory, it would move you to tears. Humanity distilled. Even to Jagatai, the superhuman Primarch senses could feel that power. His father had found him. He was a Primarch, one of 20 sons of the Emperor of mankind, the head of a galaxy-spanning empire that sought to reunite the lost colonies of mankind across the stars. He was at the head of the Great Crusade, the reconquest of the galaxy, reuniting with his lost sons, and he wanted Jagatai to join the Great Crusade at the head of an army made from his own genetic material, and to conquer the stars. It was almost overwhelming. But Jagatai did not follow in the footsteps that millions had done before him. He did not throw himself at the feet of this new overlord, just how he had done throughout his youth. That brilliant mind began to ponder. His father before him, arrayed with technology that surpassed anything that he had dreamt of. That very technology could transform his world. Also the chance of conquest in the stars, an almost dream offer to a Chogorian. But yet he was an emperor. Jagatai had seen many kings and emperors, all tyrants who eventually became corrupt and complacent. And perhaps worst of all, was there really a choice? What would happen if Chogoris was left in hands that only cared for its compliance? Jagatai knelt before the Emperor and swore his fealty, the pragmatic choice, the lesser evil. The work began immediately. A call was sent out across the stars for the 5th Legion to reunite its splinter forces. Their Primarch had been found. The Adeptus Astartes, superhuman warriors created with the meshing of gene seed grown from Jagatai's own genetic material. Faster, stronger, larger, and more resilient than any mortal man. As a legion gathered in the skies above Chogoris, the transformation began below. Targetai Yasuge, Quinn Shah, Gyu Hun, and Hasek, brothers to Jagatai who had been by his side since the beginning, volunteered to undergo the transformation into Astartes. Many of the friends and Chogorian soldiers loyal to Jagatai would not survive this process. The success rate for adults was low, and the pain was at the very threshold of human tolerance. But such was their devotion and loyalty to their Khan that thousands endured it. As the 5th Legion, the Star Hunters gathered to Chogoris, and the recruitment of Chogorian Astartes began. Jagatai, Targetai Yasuge, Quinn Shah, and Hasek headed to Terra, the capital of the growing Imperium of Man. The imperial tide of the Imperium must have been shocking to men who had at most seen stone walls around feudal cities. The smog, the towering structures, the immense overcrowding. This was what Jagatai had to protect his people from. Face to face with the Emperor and his right hand Malkador, Jagatai's discomfort grew into outrage. He was asked to be more than a conqueror. He was asked to be an arbiter of a philosophy that challenged the fundamentals of who he and his people were. The imperial truth. It was a lie. To claim that the universe was an ordered, rational place, an atheistic society, that things beyond human understanding lived within the warp was a lie. We'll be burning their temples and executing their priests in return for 1,000,000 worlds, all as ignorant beasts. Is that what you wanted? Truth may hurt, but the lie hurts more. That very so-called lie was integral to who he and the people of Chogoris were. Their Zadrin Aga, the Stormseers, drew upon that very power of the warp, guided and molded their people by it. It was a power they accepted, put boundaries on, and warded themselves against. Jagatai never lied to his people, never like the emperors and kings on Chogoris had done. He had seen its costs as kingdoms fell. The truth will come out. You won't be able to hold the blindfold in place, and once it slips, the fury of those you have deceived will be limitless. It was complicated to serve his father, to bow to an emperor, to conquer the stars and reunite humanity, but burn their churches in the name of a lie. It was the way that they had made him, questioning, pondering, honest. Suffering from the confinement, Jagatai and his sons set out for Chogoris. One day the lies would be revisited, but for now, conquest awaited.
Not even a mighty warrior can break a frail arrow when it is multiplied and supported by its fellows. As long as you brothers support one another and render assistance to one another, your enemies can never gain the victory over you. But if you fall away from each other, your enemy can break you like frail arrows, one at a time.
If you can see us, we are dangerous indeed. But that is as nothing to the peril you face if you cannot see us, and all you can hear is our laughter. Chogoris. He may have been created on Terra, but Chogoris had made him. Like some of his brother Primarchs, Jagatai had bargained with the Emperor to leave his homeworld in his hands, because he knew that it would be crushed under the tide of uniformity for the Imperium. Blood did not matter, it was heart. The spirit of Chogoris that had to be preserved. Culture bound men together, just as how he had bound the numerous tribes of the Empty Quarter under the banner of his Mathuli. The 5th Legion, the Star Hunters, sons born on Terra, veterans of the ongoing Great Crusade were ordered down to the surface and stood side by side with their newly elevated brothers from Chogoris. Thousands of soldiers, each bound with Jagatai's blood within them. But blood was not enough for Jagatai. Over 50,000 men assembled on the plains of Chogoris. Their Primarch stood before them. The enormous, powerful presence of Jagatai awakening something within them all. Each Astarte, Terran and Chogoran were presented with a ritual blade, dipped in a poison designed to suppress their healing abilities. 50,000 men marked the form of a jagged scar across their cheek. With the wound still fresh, they discarded their old names, for that man was dead. Each chose a new name to mark his ascension into the horde of Jagatai, the Kagan. Their old way of life was gone. They were now one army, one brotherhood, one legion. They swore oaths to their Kagan and to each other. As long as you brothers support one another and render assistance to one another, your enemies can never gain the victory over you. They were one. They were the Tal Scar, clad in white, and now they set out to the stars to conquer the galaxy. Jagatai's molding of his legion continued. He began to incorporate his ethos and tactics from what he had learned in his time on the steppe. Attack and then retreat, shock and awe. The 5th Legion would be the first in, and then the first out. They would attack with such blinding speed that all resistance would be washed away in a tide. World upon world would find this enormous, looming force blacken their skies, only to realize in their horror that they were already under assault, as a wave of superhuman warriors, clad in gleaming white armor, with an enormous figure leading them, would smash them apart. Whooping cries and cheers would be heard over the thunder of jet bikes and land speeders, as the spirit and heart of Chogoris sung through its warriors. Even their weapons and armor was adapted to fit their way of war. The Legion's colossal naval ships were modified to Jagatai's own specifications. He had been but a mere tribal warrior before. The bow and warhorse were his tools, but his mind had soaked in the complexity of the Imperium's technologies to a level where he could adapt it. The Dao sword, the Tolwar dagger, the Guan Dao glaive, all deadly pieces of iron forged in the plains or reforged into steel and ceramite power weapons. Even Jagatai's personal guard, his Keshik, adapted their Terminator armor for increased mobility. It was the way we made you. Words of Malkador that never seemed to leave his thoughts. Conquest was in his blood, but it was in the heart of the Chogorians. Their love of battle was unparalleled, just as the sensation of adrenaline and freedom had gripped Jagatai, mounted upon the plains of Chogoris. It was tapped into by all of the 5th Legion. Imagine the speed, the power, the sensation of slicing apart your enemies with your blades. An exhilaration that would leave you grinning ear to ear. But they were more than just the savage visage they displayed. Jagatai began to encourage his sons to be more, to delve into such things as calligraphy, hunting, and the telling of ancient tales. The society that separated scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting by fools. The 5th Legion fully joined the Great Crusade, with Targetai Yasuge, Qin Shah, Gyu Hun, and Hasek by his side. He disagreed with his father on the fate of humanity, about lying to them, so he distanced himself from it. He would follow his own path. The 5th Legion began to disperse. Like an uncurling hand, the fingers outstretched to spread their grip on the stars. Each unit led by a son Jagatai trusted completely. The 5th Legion spread from warzone to warzone, utilizing their lightning-fast raid tactics to overwhelm the horrifying Xenos and non-compliant colonies of mankind. They'd begun to conquer at such frightening speed they even outpaced Imperial reinforcements, and coincidentally, the delegation sent directly from the Imperial Palace. The greater the distance from Terra and its influence, the more free Jagatai felt. It did not matter if he received less glory, less praise from his father. His legion, his culture, and his way of life mattered more. They became a rumor, a legion who were gone before you could understand or interact with them. They were the superhumans, clad in white, bearing scars on their cheeks, speaking in their strange tongue. They were the White Scars. Sanguinius came up to his brother, a goblet in each hand, and handed one to the Khan.
To fraternity,
He said, raising his. The wine was unctuous, heavily spiced, no doubt priceless.
you must accept my apologies.
The angel said, gesturing towards 2 immense thrones carved from mahogany and capped with ivory.
My herald was mistaken from the outset. They tell me that Star Hunter is a name no longer to be uttered.
No apology needed.
The Khan said, seating himself awkwardly opposite his brother. Despite himself, he could not help staring at the way the whispering wing quill settled around the angel as he reclined, like a shimmering cloak of silver pinions.
It means nothing to us.
White Scar.
Said Sanguinius, amused, though not maliciously.
Those are the 2 words now making us talk from Terra to Ultramar. Would it flatter you to know that you are a source of some fascination, brother? That there was a race among us to see who could corner you first?
Not especially.
No, I guess not.
We were Talskar. That was the origin of it.
The Khan said, for some reason, sitting there in the presence of this dazzling, ethereal presence, he felt there should be some explanation.
A livery now as it was on Chogoris is white. They misheard the first, they observed the second. Their words, not ours.
Sanguinius shrugged.
We're all made into images for them. That is our purpose, you might say.
He leaned forward, conspiratorially.
And between you and me,
He flashed his impossibly handsome smile.
I'm not really an angel.
The Khan laughed at last.
And such things are impossible. Or so our father told me.
Yes, I had the same conversation with him, somewhat awkwardly in my case.
Sanguinius took a sip of wine.
I've been hunting you for a while, Jagatai. My compliments, your legion has learned some ship mastery. I thought my crews were good, but I believe yours could school them.
We're used to staying on the move.
Clearly, and the destruction of 9212. Impressive. Once I heard you had located the homeworld, I made for it, expecting you to be there for some weeks.
You fought them before?
On Melchior. The knowledge that they are wiped out gives me satisfaction, and they are, I take it, exterminated.
All of them.
The Khan said darkly.
Then I relish the prospect of never hearing them mentioned again.
Sanguinius cradled his goblet in the palm of his hand, swilling it absent-mindedly.
All Xenos are foul, but my sons developed a particular hatred for those.
Then why were you not sent to destroy them?
Your pardon?
You had the measure of them.
The Khan took a swig of his own.
We used intelligence your legion had gathered. I wonder why you were not sent to finish the task.
The angel shrugged.
We had other battles.
I've not been doing this for as long as you, but I'm not slow-witted.
He placed his goblet beside him and leaned forwards in the throne.
We were sent there to witness the depravities of devotion. Through this, we were enjoined to understand the wisdom of the Imperial truth.
You do not see the need for it.
I'm yet to be convinced.
I'd heard the rumors.
This is where you tell me that I need to understand the necessity, that we sheared them for their own good and that the deceptions are noble. For all that, they remain an illusion.
Sanguinius said nothing for a while. He looked at his brother thoughtfully, the last of his smile dying away.
You have psychers in your legion,
He said at last.
Of course.
a librarius.
Of a kind.
Then that is already a refutation.
The angel said.
The populace can believe our powers are bounded by science. Even our generals, if they want to. We know it isn't.
The Khan looked at his brother warily, as if cautious to avoid some kind of trap.
And what do you suppose that leaves us with?
I will not debate with you of gods and monsters.
The angel said.
But the psyker cannot be avoided. Already there are those among us who wish to see them banished, shut away or blunted, lest they unlock something fouler within us. Those voices are growing stronger. Despite what you may believe, my wayward brother, the throne listens to its sons. One day, if we are careless, we will lose all these things, and then we will be the ones at fault, for we did nothing.
The Khan looked skeptical.
I care nothing for what another Primarch does.
They won't stop at their own legions.
Sanguinius remained reclined, almost languid, his pristine golden robes catching the candlelight.
For the Puritan, there is no comfort in scouring one's own house. All houses must be made clean. You are on your own, Jagatai, heading further into the void. An empire onto yourself, so you don't hear the whispers.
And I care nothing for whispers.
Sanguinius snorted.
You should. I've seen worlds destroyed by them.
Stop me, good people. Don't you see my temper is running away with me? Help, Master Common Sense. Are you afraid? Good Mistress Prudence, come to my aid. Stop me, Conscience. Stop me, I pray. My temper is running away. Dear Brother Kindness, snatch after the reins. Help, or my temper will dash out my brains. Help, or I'll get a terrible fall. Help, shame, caution, love, wisdom and all.
I've never desired fellowship with any of you. Do not take that as pride, more like necessity. I find obligation to others difficult. Fraternity, all alone on Chogoris. Jagatai had seen that he was different from his people. He was more than just a mortal man. With the coming of the Emperor, that idea of being unique had changed forever. 20 Primarchs, brothers, crafted from the Emperor's own genetic material. Superhumans destined to be the generals of the Great Crusade, reuniting humanity under one banner. As the decades passed in his service to the Imperium, it was inevitable that his paths would cross with one of them, a brother, an equal. Horus had been there on Chogoris. The sight of him must have been intriguing. Just to be in his presence, you could feel his charisma shine. Horus saw beneath the facade of the savage, seeing the cunning, quiet intelligence. More interactions came over the decades. Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, was an encounter hard to forget. his warming face, his ethereal presence. Something made even Jagatai, the calm and closed-off man, want to speak. His brother had accepted his need for isolation, but warned that events inside the Imperium couldn't be ignored forever. And then Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns. Both Magnus and Jagatai's life had been shaped by sorcery. Magnus the Gifted One himself, the scholar who wielded the power of the warp to incredible heights. And Jagatai's life on Chogoris was guided and nurtured by his Zadrin Aga, the Storm Seers, the cultural rock of his people and their traditions, philosophy and way of life. He had been guided by Shinaz, perhaps his closest friend in the universe, his teacher and mentor who followed him to the stars, becoming Targutai Yasuge. Jagatai respected Magnus, as the two had so much in common. To his other brothers, he was a mystery, something he intended to keep that way. Fraternity was obligation, and he had always wanted to escape obligation. Walls made him feel suffocated, be they physical or mental. Even his taste was different, compared to the lavish and ornate displays that every legion seemed to display in their weaponry, their armor, and their ships. Simple stretched hides, Chogorian pelts, and humble tribal food were the choice of the Warhawk. Unlike many of his brothers, Jagatai had truly bonded to his people. To each Primarch and Jagatai, they'd always felt in some way removed from humanity. They were born rulers, they were saviors, they experienced the loneliness that comes from leadership, magnified by their magnanimous stature and earth-shattering presence. But to Jagatai, he did his best to be an equal. He was the Kagan, but he never put himself beyond the scrutiny of those who served him. The Kurultai, a council where all were free to voice their thoughts as equals. A tradition born in the steppe and retained on the galactic scale. Despite being a Primarch, Targutai Yasuge, Quinn Shah, Gyu Hun, and Hasik were more like brothers than sons. He had them and their council, so he had no void in his heart to fill. They understood where the rest of the Imperium misunderstood. Even their livery of Tal Scar was lost to ignorance and disinterest. The outsiders named them White Scars because of their lack of understanding. The Fifth sailed further and further into the void of the stars, content within their own company. As more worlds came under the shadow of the White Scars, Jagatai finally began to see more of what Malkador and the Emperor had tried to make him understand on Terra. Old Night, the collapse of humanity's spanning federation across the stars. A wound in the psyche of the civilization that remembered those frightful days. One of the justifications for the Great Crusade was to protect the future of humanity, to unify it under one banner, to protect it from a slow decay. Devoured by ourselves and the horrifying xenos that hid in the dark corners of space. Chogoris' society had collapsed millennia before, reverting to a feudal-like existence, where the scars of Old Night were forgotten. It was only within the Great Crusade did Jagatai finally understand the horrors of what Malkador had warned of. Xenos. They were disgusting. During the emancipation of Droon, they encountered a range of horrifying creatures of barely definable form. That all these creatures had in common, bloated bodies that floated on invisible etheric tides, multiple eyes, thrashing tendrils, and the ability to unleash fearsome blasts of warp energy as they threw hordes of mind-controlled humans at them, treating humanity as if it were a thing to be controlled, like mindless slaves, a trait Jagatai had despised in the kings and emperors on Chogoris. Perhaps the Emperor was right. Humanity had to be protected from this desecration and horror. But though many Xenos made the White Scars curse their name in disgust, for others they held a different view. Orcs, the greenskins, the hulking beasts whose love of war matched the Chogorians. Whooping cheers of "Hi Chogoris" met a screaming green tide on thousands of worlds throughout the decades of the Great Crusade. To have a worthy foe was everything to them, and Jagatai and the White Scars' blades were slick with alien blood. Smiles dominated their faces as no test was more worthy, though this further slaughter that Jagatai and the Legion was bathing in would change in a sobering moment. Side by side, the White Scars and the Lunar Wolves stood, cleansing another Orc horde. The campaign had been brutal, and the encirclement of the Orcs' capital had taken weeks of mind-numbingly brutal warfare. Jagatai and his White Scars utilized their speed to break apart and disorientate the enemy's line, whilst the slow, unstoppable tide of the Lunar Wolves crushed the weakened and confused Orcs. Encircled and flattened by a mountain's worth of bombardment, the Imperial forces prepared for the final assault. With Quinn Shah, Gyu Hun, and Hasek, and Sir Janus of the Lunar Wolves by his side, Jagatai raced into battle, a Primarch at the forefront of an unstoppable, lightning-fast wedge. A movement he had taken from the plains and improved with the strength of Legiones Astartes. Fighting their way into the Orcs' capital, the clash began. To stand at its center, the cacophony of noise, heat, and blood would overwhelm you. Fighting with every ounce of strength and ferocity, the Orcs were being pushed back until Gyu Hun Khan, one of Jagatai's oldest friends, a man who had followed him from the plains to the stars, overextended. Jagatai screamed over the battle for him to pull back. First in, first out. But Gyu Hun held. His wounds were pouring, and in the melee rush, he was knocked back, falling into the emerging magma pouring throughout the holes of the previously bombarded surface. Jagatai halted, rushing over to catch the last moment of his friend, sinking into his blazing death. Jagatai stood frozen, and then with a scream that could shatter eardrums, he ordered everyone to pull away. Something had awoken within him. He broke into a run, first heavily, measuring his strokes, and then accelerating, faster and harder, until he had moved into that state the Chogorian sages called Alach Gech. The quiet smile had gone. The quiet cunning had gone. All that was left was the cold rage. His speed kept increasing. He became a blur, too fast for the human eye. He was hidden behind a curtain of severed flesh and thrown blood. A primordial force burning through the ranks of Xenos. The Orcs, a dull-witted, primitive race whose only reason for life was war, began to run. Their encoded love for battle, overwhelmed by the onslaught. Eventually the screams faded away, and all that remained was Jagatai, covered in alien gore. It must have been like witnessing a god fight. Breathtaking, haunting, life-altering. It was the way we made you. The words of Malkador echoed in his mind. Stop me, good people. Don't you see? My temper is running away with me. Had they placed that rage within him? He was a son of Chogoris. Chogoris had made him, but perhaps he was more a creation of terror, more a designed tool. Gyu Hun was dead. Others had passed over the numerous decades of the Great Crusade, but a friend, one of the men who had been by Jagatai's side since the beginning, He confided in Yasugai. They knew that many of them would perish in this war. In fact, death on the battlefield was a fate they all desired. Yet the sting still hurt, even to the superhuman warriors, even to a Primarch. Following the joint compliant action, Jagatai and the Legion returned to Chogoris. Quan Zu, the Legion's fortress, built high in the Kumkatra Mountains, was the only speck of Imperial influence and industrialization. Jagatai had ensured that the people of Chogoris were left to their way of life. It kept them strong, ideal for recruitment, and their traditions were not swallowed up under the tide of Imperial conformity. For their Kagan to return, it was a time for celebration and rest. A brief time where Jagatai could still roam the plains once more, with Yasugai and Hasek, taking in the sensation of freedom that he had enjoyed so much in his youth. It had all changed so much. One thing that all of them, even Jagatai, struggled with was the passage of time. They were all older. They had now lived multiple human lifetimes. Everything dies. Words from Yasugai Jagatai knew to be true, but deep down he knew he would outlive them all. Something that saddened him greatly. Returning to Quan Zu, the Legion rested, even taking time to participate in its Chogorian traditions. Jubal Khan, a rising star within the Legion, caught the eye of the Kagan, showing his prowess in an incredible duel, fighting with the methods of blinding speed and engaging and then falling back. Even his Chogorian was perfect, yet this was a son of terror. It was a hopeful sight. Jagatai's plan had worked, his unifying of the Star Hunters and the Tal Scar. But not all born of terror fit so neatly. Others, born in that distant world, found themselves to be outcasts and sought a place of belonging, a place where rank and homeworld didn't matter, a place in the warrior lodges.
Some of us had it easier than others,
Mortarion muttered. Fulgrim looked archly at Sanguinius. An awkward silence fell.
You should not regret that,
said the Khan. The other three turned, as if surprised that he had a voice.
The hardship.
Mortarion glared at him sourly. His pallid flesh almost matched Ullanor's overcast, humid skies.
I don't regret it,
he said.
I could only regret that only some of us gained our father's favor, though. I could regret that.
Sanguinius took a sip of wine from his glass, serenely unconcerned.
Brother, you should be pleased for Horus.
Why?
Mortarion's expression was pinched.
Because he was found first, had the longest to work with his legion. If it had been you on Chthoniya, if it had been me, we might have been in his place now.
Fulgrim sniffed.
Speak for yourself. Being War Master is not the only accolade.
Sanguinius laughed.
No more talk of your Palatine Aquila, brother. You will make him more jealous.
I'm not jealous. Not of Horus, nor of you,
scowled Mortarion, missing the humor in Sanguinius's voice.
You don't understand the problem.
Fulgrim leaned forward, clasping his long hands together.
Which is?
While he was leading us, we fought to gain even a glance or gesture from him. That was acceptable, for none of us are his rival. Nothing in the galaxy is his rival. Now we will fight to gain a glance from Horus. But Horus is not the architect of this. He is just one of us. It will lead to trouble.
Fulgrim shot a tolerant look at Sanguinius.
He is jealous.
The Khan shook his head. Fulgrim could be irritatingly stupid.
No, he speaks the truth. It should never have happened.
Sanguinius looked at the Khan thoughtfully.
I thought you, of all of us, would feel joy for Horus.
The Khan shrugged.
He is the best of us. I begrudge him nothing, and I have taught him so. But it should never have happened.
So should it have been you?
Asked Fulgrim. Acerbiacally, Mortarion snorted again, but Sanguinius said nothing.
I wouldn't have taken it,
said the Khan.
Of course you would have,
said Fulgrim. The Khan shook his head.
I have no use for another title. My people give me enough.
Sanguinius smiled.
My brother, I think you are the most inscrutable of us all. I know what Rogel wants, and I know what Rebute wants. But even after so long, I have no idea what you want.
He wants to be left alone,
said Fulgrim.
To shoot off into the stars and hunt down Xenos on those delightful jet bikes. They're devilishly fast. I heard from a contact on Mars, Yagatai, that you do strange things to your ships.
The Khan shot him a heavy-lidded stare.
I heard you do strange things to your warriors.
Fulgrim's slender face briefly flared with anger, but Sanguinius laughed.
I wonder which one of you would win in a duel.
The angel mused.
Name the place, brother,
Fulgrim said to the Khan.
I'd even travel to Chogoris, if you built a palace to keep the dust from my armor.
The Khan felt the insult. It stabbed at him, deeply, but his expression never changed. They could never know, none of them, how much their close fraternity rankled him.
You would lose,
said the Khan. Fulgrim grinned, but there was something fragile in it.
Oh?
You would lose because you treat it like a game, like you treat everything, and I would not. You would lose because you know nothing of me, and I know everything of you because you shouted from the turrets of your battle cruisers. My prowess remains unknown. You have some reputation as a swordsman, brother. But I make no boast when I tell you, I would leave you choking on it.
Fulgrim's cheeks flushed. For a moment, he looked like he would go for his blade. As ever, Sanguinius' calm smile soothed the moment.
Now I regret bringing this up. In the cause of peace, shall we put this stupidity behind us? We are not at war, and never likely to be, and that is truly a blessing.
Who'd have thought it?
Said Mortarion to the Khan, a shrewd glint in his rheumery eyes.
You do have your pride.
As do you.
Then what would be the wager on us, brother?
Asked Mortarion.
What would you pay if we fought?
The Khan sighed.
No, I grow tired of...
Tell me.
Mortarion insisted.
Or do you only consider the odds with sword dancers?
The Khan stared back at him. As he did so, he realized that, of all his 17 brothers, Mortarion was the only one who, like him, had remained on the utter margins during the Great Crusade. Even Alfarius had played more of a role at its center. The Death Lord was as mysterious to him as the Warp. Intriguing.
I don't know,
he said, truthfully enough.
It would be interesting to find out.
Mortarion laughed then, but what could be seen of his expression was crooked. His whole face seemed arranged for downness, as if levity risked cracking it.
That it would, but we have nothing to fight over, you and I, so breathe easy.
No?
Asked Sanguinius, seriously this time.
Not even the Librarius.
The crooked smile faded.
That's different.
The angel took another sip of his wine.
How so?
You've not heard the news then. Our father has taken the matter in hand. I know you take your creation seriously, but you must know it couldn't be suffered to go on.
Fulgrim looked intrigued.
What do you mean, taken in hand?
There will be a reckoning.
The Death Lord shot a wry glance at the Khan, as though reveling in some secret knowledge that would become public very soon.
I'll be there when it happens. I hope you will be there too.
Some fights are too important to be left to advocates.
Nearly 2 centuries of warfare, thousands of worlds conquered, and millions of Xenos and non-compliant colonies have been slain. It was in the ashes of the Imperium's greatest victory over an enormous greenskin war that the Imperium changed forever. Ullanor, cleansed of alien filth at the dawn of the 32nd millennium, held a muster of billions of superhuman and mortal warriors. Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the Lunar Wolves, was named War Master. The Emperor himself handed the responsibility of the Great Crusade to his most favoured son. It was a mistake. Jagatai had seen the fate of emperors who stood back, how depraved, corrupt, and selfish they became. Why did his father leave the conquest? Why did he not tell them why? More lies he knew was justified under the guise of doing what they thought was best for humanity. The dynamic had changed forever. At a time when Jagatai had needed a brother, a friend, not a superior officer. The Librarius, the Chogorian Stormseers, the backbone of Chogoris, their guides from the plains all the way to the stars, were under threat. A divide had been growing over the latter decades of the Great Crusade. Those, such as Leman Russ and Mortarion, who felt an utter disgust towards those who drew on the powers of the warp. Even Corvus Corax and Rogel Dawn were adverse. Many lie in the middle, but it was Jagatai, Sanguinius and Magnus who were their most ardent defenders. Jagatai had been reluctant to plant himself within the politics of the Imperium, but Sanguinius decades ago had convinced him to fight for his Stormseers, lest the decision be made in his absence. Over the latter part of the Great Crusade, Jagatai and Yasuge had tried to show Horus the necessity of having Psykers in their arsenal, displaying on numerous campaigns his Stormseer's effectiveness in countering other Xenos Psykers. But the chance had been lost. Horus was now War Master, the commander, the one who could not be shown to pick sides or have favourites. Jagatai had lost an ally, but he could also feel he was losing a friend. There was a chasm between him and Horus, a distance bred from the hierarchy. They could both feel it. Fraternity was obligation. That old feeling kept creeping in as Jagatai left the muster of Ullanor, frustrated and disheartened, though he did not leave alone. Ilya Ravalion, a member of the Departamento Munistorum, was assigned to the 5th Legion at the dawn of this new era. The elderly woman, born on Terra, with a photographic memory, proved to be adept at all things logistical. She was a counterbalance to a legion that already had its eyes upon the next target, often overlooking what was left behind. Jagatai and Ilya over the coming years forged a bond. Over drinking wine and playing Go together, Jagatai, the free-spirited superhuman, with the orderly Terran-born mortal. Though the presence of the Primarch had made her feel nauseous and even lightheaded in the beginning, the elderly general was able to look Jagatai in the eye, to stand face to face and offer her wisdom and experience, something that became invaluable in the coming campaign. Chondax, the fortress world inhabited by the remnants of the vile greenskins that had fled Ullanor. The beginning of the grueling campaign aligned with the reckoning Jagatai's mysterious brother Mortarion had spoken of, the Council of Nicaea. Assembled from the highest bureaucrats, senior Astra Militarum, and a representative from all of the Adeptus Astartes legions, the Fabricator General of Mars, Malkador, and even the Emperor. the building debate in the shadows finally surfaced. The Librarius, Psychers, and their sanctioning in the Imperium had to be dealt with. Two sides had been drawn. Magnus, the Blood Angels, and Jagatai, the Librarius. Tagatai Yasuge and all those on their side spoke vehemently for the justification of psychic powers. But everything came tumbling down with the revelation of Magnus's arrogance, that he had delved into warp sorcery. He had gone too far. The pro-psychers failed, Yasugai feeling immense guilt for failing his friend and Primarch. The accumulation of decades of work, the crafting of a new Librarius rules created by Jagatai, Sanguinis, and Magnus had gone. Jagatai had often warned Magnus of his need to push limits, and now its cost was the Chogorians' way of life. But the message wouldn't reach the Kagan. Horrific warp storms began to form around Chondax. It made Ilya uncomfortable, but Jagatai, in truth, was all too pleased to be out of range, forgotten, misunderstood, left alone. With Quinn Shah, Hasek, and his white scars, and a green tide in front of them, the 5th Legion headed to war.
I fear decrepitude, because all emperors are liars. All empires are lies. But there is only one unforgivable lie. That is the lie that says this is the end. You are the conqueror. You have achieved it, and now all that remains is to build walls higher and shelter behind them. Now, the lie says, the worlds are safe.
It is not enough to take from an enemy their life. Rather, take from them also their place of safety, their allies, their homes, and their loved ones. Crush all those in their care. Lay their chattels to waste, and then drive them alone and naked into the darkness. Take everything they have and burn it, for the mere pleasure of seeing the ash crackle between your fingers, and call it nothing more than a beginning. Chondax, the remnants of Ulrak Uruk's greenskin empire, would prove to be a bloody battle for the 5th. With horrific warp storms surrounding the sector of space, this was a war solely down to the white scars. Jagatai, Ilya, Hasek, and Quinn Shah. For 7 years, the 5th Legion fought in a back and forth grueling campaign, the difficulties of the terrain being mountainous and marshy, the crux of their usual fast-paced encirclement maneuvers. And yet more seemed to be at play. Some, such as Shiban Khan of the Brotherhood of the Moon, felt that there was something wrong. Something wasn't sitting right. He had found legionaries with their wounds too clean for an orc's work. It was as if they were fighting something greater than the mindless war before them. Jagatai spent much of his time with his council, though he missed the guidance of his friend Yasugai. He found that his thoughts lay more towards the future. The Great Crusade was now expanding to the edges of the galaxy. After Chondax, what great holdouts were there? What if they had no more enemies left? After his conquest of Chogoris centuries ago, he had not settled down, placed himself on a throne, built walls, and told himself that he was safe, because it was a lie, and he despised lies. Something that had created so much distance between him and his father. But he only really feared one thing in this universe: decrepitude. The Emperor had arrived not long after his conquest of Chogoris. What would he have done in a time of peace? It was the way we made you. The words of Malkador. They had made him a hunter. Conquest was in his blood. They had made him They had made him uncomfortable with peace, lest in a way he fall to corruption. To live without purpose as humans leads us all down a spiraling path. What would you do if that hollowness took over you? Would you lie to yourself and say that you are strong when there is no goal to achieve? But perhaps that fear would never come to pass, in a manner that Jagatai would have never suspected. After years of brutal war, Jagatai and the White Scars finally achieved victory, but at the precipice of this campaign, a fleet belonging to the 20th, the Alpha Legion, burst from the wall, assembling before the 5th Legion. Any communication was met with pure, dreaded silence. 2 Astartes fleets stared at each other. Astropathic communications began to flood in. Through the tumultuous warp storms, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves had turned traitor. Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons had been slain. The homeworld of Prospero destroyed. The War Master orders the 5th Legion to engage the traitor and bring him to justice. Madness. Jagatai's mind began racing. His friend Magnus, was he truly dead? Russ was a traitor. So much power concentrated in so few hands. Look at this madness. Attention spread across the thousands of White Scar warriors and legionary personnel. The possibility of fighting another legion, the horror that battle would entail, was a sobering thought. More astropathic communications came through. Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fist orders the White Scars to return to Terra and defend it alongside the Space Wolves. The War Master has turned traitor. More came flooding in. Leman Russ of the Space Wolves requests the White Scars' aid against the Alpha Legion. They have turned traitor. Someone was lying. Was this Alpha Legion blockade the deception? Did they want Jagatai to return to Terra? Did Russ speak the truth, and they were being held above Chondax? Or were the 20th simply waiting to see which side the 5th chose? Jagatai hated the lies. Perhaps none of them were speaking the truth. They were the 5th, the White Scars, Ordu Jagatai, and they were slaves to no one. He would find the truth for himself. The stalemate ended. The forgotten and underestimated Legion, in a move synchronized to perfection that would leave even the mighty Guilliman and Dawn jealous, launched the entire legionary fleet at once. The coordination, the skill was incredible. Finally, after years of serving by their side, Ilya, the Terran outsider, finally saw why Jagatai and his sons had allowed themselves to be underestimated. And the sight brought her to genuine laughter. The chisel, an instant, tightly formed wedge burst through the Alpha Legion blockade. Their destination, the truth. Jagatai made his way to Prospero. After days, unnerved, trying to decipher the truth, the White Scars finally arrived, only to find a husk. Pollutants, smog, and a violent storm filled the ruined skies of this once beautiful world of Prospero. Not just the people and the cities, but the planet itself had been annihilated. Jagatai felt the cold rage. He felt sadness and confusion. He had to know more. He had to know the truth. Jagatai, with Quinn Shah and his Keshik by his side, descended down to the crumbling, burnt surface. He'd hoped to find the truth. He'd hoped to find his brother, leaving the fleet to his friend Hasek Noyan Khan. Hands he would soon find were not to be trusted.
No.
The Khan stood up again.
Whatever you are not Magnus. You don't even sound like him.
Magnus shrugged.
Believe what you want. Perhaps I am not Magnus. I used to be. that is certain. But maybe what counts as myself is not what it was. Part of me dwells elsewhere, on a barren rock halfway across the cosmos. Part of me is here, lingering like a stench of a carrion. I can't quite leave, not yet. I think something has to happen first. Maybe you are it, or maybe you were never meant to be here. I favor the latter. You were always unpredictable.
I came to find a friend,
said the Khan distastefully.
Whatever else had happened, I thought I could come to you for counsel.
Magnus looked hurt.
Do not be harsh, Kagan. Only a part of me resides here, slinking in the shadows. The better part is elsewhere, pondering loftier things. Soon he, or I, or we, will come to a judgment.
What will that be?
I don't know. I really don't. Lorgar sends me pleas almost daily, reminding me what Russ did here. He thinks we are kindred spirits. Touching, really.
Magnus paused and stared down at his flickering hands.
Sometimes, though, I still think there might be some way back. I see it as a maze, one in which all I have to do is find the route through. Perhaps the Emperor will forgive. If he survives what I've unleashed, perhaps he will.
Then Magnus's spectral eye flickered up at the Khan again.
But you, Yagatai, what is your choice?
The Khan shook his head.
We are who we are. No one's slaves.
Magnus laughed.
That's not good enough. You have to choose.
If what you say is true, then the dream is over. It will be each legion alone.
It doesn't work like that.
Horus corrupted. The Emperor is a tyrant.
True enough.
Then I choose neither.
Magnus laughed again, though the sound was bitter.
This thing is like a great dark star, ringed by fire. It will draw you in, bit by bit, until you are orbiting it with the rest of us. Even you do not have shibs fast enough to escape it, Yagatai. Even your white scars will not get out.
The Khan felt sick from the stink of death and ashes. His blade glittered coldly in the near-perfect dark.
We can outrun anything that lives.
But they do not live. Not like we do. I do not lie, brother. Choose. We will meet again, either as allies or foes. So you may as well decide now.
The Khan stared down at Magnus, his mind in turmoil.
What have you become?
He asked, no longer able to keep the horror from his voice.
What I was always destined to be,
said Magnus, looking at him sadly.
But you still have a choice, brother. Make the right one.
The Khan held his ground, tensing.
Enough, brother.
Magnus laughed.
You don't want to know. That's always been your weakness. I know it all now. I could tell you the Emperor's name, and it would surprise you. I could tell you that the fates decreed Fulgrim to be sent to Chogoris, and you to Chemos, and I could tell you which arcane force in the universe prevented it.
He took a step, then another towards the Khan.
Do you wish to know where you will die, Kagan? Do you wish to know on what world and in which dimension your soul will find its ending?
These things are not known.
All is known.
The Khan looked at him warily.
You told me I had a choice. My fate, all fate is still to be written.
Magnus grinned. His eyes seemed to be weeping, though it was hard to tell if it was tears or blood.
Stories may meander, but the endings never change. Believe me, I have witnessed the authors.
He shuddered.
They are terrible.
He whispered, by now only inches away from the sword.
I have what I came for, brother.
Said the Khan.
You can only give me one piece of knowledge that I truly desire.
Magnus inclined his head.
And what is that?
How to restore you.
Magnus stared. For a moment, he looked truly bewildered, as if he had expected mockery and received sincerity, or perhaps the other way round. He looked down at his hands, then around at the devastation of his kingdom. Misery mingled with confusion.
I am corrupted.
He whispered, as if realizing it all over again.
Restore me, and I shall become a lord again. I shall be the Crimson King, free to rule over a world of spells and vengeance. The galaxy may live to rue that.
You are my friend,
said the Khan quietly. Magnus looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, the old dignity was there, etched upon a ravaged face and glimmering in the dark.
Then I judge you know what to do.
The Khan nodded and pulled his sword round for the strike, slivers of witchlight skittered along the ruined-wound steel.
Until we meet on the starlight,
he promised.
Sooner than you might think,
said Magnus, making no effort to evade the blow. The Khan swung, and the dowel glittered through the air. When it hit Magnus's outline, the ghostly shell shattered, spilling into 1,000 pieces like broken glass. A wild crack ran out, a steely snap, followed by a shriek like a child's cry. The dust around him billowed up in a cloud, swirling and writhing. The Khan was momentarily blinded and staggered back. Never do the easy thing. An apparition, a shard, a broken piece of a whole that was once his friend, was all that remained of Magnus. Just as Prospero had been burned to ashes, ravaged and broken, so had the 1,000 Suns and their Primarch. Roaming through the wreckage of Prospero, with Quinn Shah and his Keshik, Jagatai found himself set upon by strange ethereal monsters. And in the confusion he was separated, falling deep into the tunnel systems built below the crumbling city of Tizca, finding a ghost of what was or is Magnus. The sight broke him. He had come to find a friend, but only found the husk of the brother he had respected and even loved. The shard of Magnus told him that time had run out, that he had to choose. He'd always run away, relying on his speed to outrun his problems. But this war would find him and his sons. He had to choose. Choose a side. With all the cards on the table, with the shard's wisdom, the truth was out. The Emperor had lied. Yaksha, demons were real. And Jagatai had to make a choice. But what kind of choice was it? The words rang in his head. Horus is corrupted. The Emperor is a tyrant. Foul entities of the warp had corrupted the brother he loved, Horus, but he would be accepted by them. A life of unending conquest awaited him and his sons, but humanity would suffer. The Emperor is a tyrant, one who lies to his people, crushing thousands of worlds under the guise of compliance. The Imperium looked down upon him and his sons, but there was a future for humanity under the Imperium. So I fight for a father who I never loved, against a brother that I did. I defend an empire that never wanted me, against an army that would have taken me in a heartbeat. Jagatai made his choice, putting the shard of Magnus to rest, and escaping out of the depths, he reunited with Quinn Shah and his remaining Keshik, who had rescued one lone survivor from the ruins of Prospero, Reviel Arvida, a psyche of immense power. But as they prepared to return to their vessel, The storm-riddled skies darkened. A teleportation circle erupted before them as Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard, emerged, surrounded by his Death Shroud guard. The sight of the pale, sickly thing, whose rebreather rattled like death's music, was a sight that would fill any mortal with reverence and dread. The brother who he had last seen above Ullanor, the one who, like him, had been assigned to the outskirts of the Great Crusade, forgotten, misunderstood. Mortarion began to speak, to offer his brother the chance to join Horus, destroy the Emperor who lies. Oh, and he hated the lies, didn't he? He offered a galaxy of warriors, a galaxy of hunters, where the strong are given their freedom. A galaxy in which there is no dead hand at the tiller, constraining them, lying to them. Besides, half of his legion had already been turned, so it was only a matter of time. But Jagatai stopped him. He had seen through him, his mysterious brother. He had campaigned against the Psyker, only to now find himself in collusion with them, legions embracing the warp. He was not here because of brotherhood. He was here because he had no more allies. The Death Guard, the slow, indestructible anvil, with the white scars, the perfect, swift hammer, they would be unstoppable together. And when the Emperor and Horus were gone, there could be space for a new Emperor. Jagatai felt nothing but disgust for this selfish betrayal, and he would not be dragged down with them. They had chosen to collude with foul entities of the warp. They were fools. And besides, long ago, the oath had already been made. Mortarion's sickle crackled into life. The two sides clashed. The slow but yet resilient Mortarion versus the lightning-fast Kagan. It was like a battle between gods. Jagatai's blinding speed and dancing strikes began to tally wounds. The Khan laughed. Wielding his blade again freely felt good. Going up against a fellow Primarch was a kind of test he had missed for too long. But for the first time in his life, Jagatai felt tiredness. Mortarion stood bloodied. Dozens of wounds covered him, but the few that he had landed on Jagatai were punishing, toxin-laden gashes. A stalemate had been reached. Mortarion, enraged and bitter, began to retreat. The Death Lord pledged that this wound between them was not over, and that one of them would die at the other's hands. With the help of the Thousand-Son Rivial Arvida, Jagatai, Quinn Shah, and the remaining Keshig teleported back onto their flagship, only to find utter chaos. The Warrior Lodges, that secretive organization that had festered for decades amongst the legions, had risen up, declaring themselves for Horus, for the War Master, for the universe of warriors and hunters. Thousands of the Terrans and Chogorians, either by resentment for their forced conversion into the Chogorian way of life, or simply convinced by the universe painted by Horus, had been turned in secret. Hasek Noyan Khan, a man who had been with Jagatai from the start, had tried to force the Legion's hand, force them into the future of warriors and hunters. Horror gripped Jagatai, seeing the carnage of the 5th Legion's civil strife. Brothers slaying brothers. Striding through the middle of the bloodbath, the fighting began to die down. As Jagatai roared his disgust at his friend's betrayal, he plunged his Dao sword deep into the panicking Hasek's torso, declaring this coup over. Humbled and shamed, the traitors were escorted to the brigs as Jagatai and the 5th prepared for war. Betrayed by one of his closest friends, a man who he had spent centuries with, was a bitter snag at the heart of Jagatai. though some relief came as he was finally reunited with Yasugai. 7 years the Kagan had been deprived of his chief Stormseer, his closest advisor, his friend, locked within the disaster that had been the Council of Nicaea and the subsequent warp storms around Chondax. The traitors were dealt with. Hasek and thousands of others were locked away. They all deserved death, but it was Yasugai who counseled that the previous Warrior Lodge members, the Terrans and Chogorins, be offered a route to redemption. They were charged with the crime of being fools as well as traitors, not truly knowing the extent to which the War Master Horus had fallen. It was due in part to the bravery of such men as Shiban Khan, who had held long enough for Jagatai to end the civil conflict. The Magyar Mazan, death squads, a road to redemption was offered, for in this coming war they would need every able-bodied warrior. The Horus Heresy had truly begun. 9 legions had betrayed the Emperor of Mankind, declaring their loyalty to the War Master Horus. 3 loyalist legions, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard and Iron Hands, were almost entirely wiped. The remaining 6 loyalists either scattered or divided as war and violent warp storms ravaged the galaxy. What began was the most brutal war in human history. Billions of innocents would die, legionaries slaughtering each other, worlds burning. Again the words burned in Jagatai's mind. Never had so few been given so much power. It was a mistake, an emperor's mistake. One caused when his father believed the lie that tells you can put up walls and you will be safe. Jagatai, Yasugai, Quinn Shah, Ilya, Shiban, Jubal, and Reviel Arda of the Thousand Suns began to enact their wrath upon the traitor legions. The fingers of the 5th Legion branched off, enacting their grip across light years of real space. With lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics, isolated traitor fleets would be destroyed, supply lines harassed, equipment sabotaged, each small piece adding up to a delay, time for the Imperial forces at Terra to fortify. They all knew that the palace would be where this would end. Years of non-stop, brutal warfare consumed humanity, but its cost to Jagatai and the White Scars was more than just their brothers' lives. The soul of the Legion was dying. The heresy was changing them. They were fighting men who they had once served with, men who they had bled with, watching them cut down their own brothers in brutal legionary upon legionary duels. Jagatai and the 5th had come from a world where the beauty and adrenaline pumping, life-affirming combat was something they lived for. Hunting Xenos across the stars, feeling the wind rush on their face, the freedom and joy of the plains taken to the stars. But there was no more joyous laughing, no more whooping cries, no more cheek-to-cheek smiles, just brutal human slaughter. Members such as Shiban Khan, encouraged by his Primarch's ethos of the noble pursuits, found he had nothing to celebrate, nothing noble to express. Killing was one thing, they had been bred to do that, but inflicting pain, hurting their enemies, this war had changed them. Jagatai had not brought his people to the stars for this. Their enemies had changed too, taken over by worship to the Yaksha. Their corruption manifested physically, a sobering reminder of a path Jagatai could have gone down if his love for Horus had eclipsed his sense. 4 years of no rest. Nearly 1/3 of Jagatai's sons were dead. Then the worst news of all came. In a confrontation with Eidolon of the Emperor's children, Quinn Shah was dead. His body recovered in thanks to the efforts of Reviel Arvida. a debt the Legion could never repay. With his friend's broken helm in his hands, as Quinshah's body was cast into the void of space, returned to the universe, as was the Chogoran way, Jagatai felt the grief wash over him. Chogorians knew that to die in battle was a glorious end they all desired, but this was tainted in a way. Jagatai assembled the Kurultai, a place for all to speak. All of them, Jagatai, Yasugai, Ilya, Shiban, Jubal, and Arvida, with Quinshah's death still in their hearts, debated on the Legion's next move. The walls were closing in. The traitors had them in a noose. They had adapted to the 5th's tactics, and now it was costing them. Half wanted to make a final stand, bearing the weight of melancholic soldiers hoping to die a good death. But Yasugai and Ilya urged them to find a way to Terra. They could still fight. Jagatai made his decision. The oath had been made. The White Scars would stand on Terra. The 5th Legion assembled everything they had and headed towards their last gambit, the location of a powerful navigator who could guide them through the warp storms, terrorizing the galaxy. But the journey would not be smooth. Mortarian, the wound created on Prospero, had reopened. With the Death Guard Legion and a force of Emperor's children, the brothers prepared to face each other once again. Only hatred and disgust left between them.
Can you not see the sorrow in someone's tearful eyes, or see the dread in someone's weary frown? Can you not see the fear when someone's telling lies? Can you not see that each poor soul has a heavy cross to bear, one which we hope will never come our way? Perhaps the onus is on us to show them that we care and lift their spirits and take away dismay.
The command locate Yasugai died on his lips, with a synchronicity that could not have been random. The Stormseer's mind voice was suddenly there, though racked with agony.
In the beginning, I was Shinaz,
Yasugai said, managing to convey some kind of broken humor amid the pain.
Remember that? You named me.
Do not do it.
The Khan murmured, his mind racing, guessing at last what had happened. The machinery, the underpalace, the absence of his father from the war. With sudden, terrible clarity, the pieces fell into order.
This is my command. Do not do it.
The deep ways are perilous, and Yaksha will thrive in it. You are their protector.
The Khan was moving then, striding down from the command throne. The teleporters might have been usable, even now.
Tagutai, this will end you. Do not do it. Return to the ship.
No, that I would have followed you to the end, my lord. I would have stood beside you on Terra. When I am gone, do not let them forget. Do not let them become what is hateful.
Come back.
You are their protector.
Then he was gone, wrenched out of existence. Jagatai staggered, slipping to one knee. The world seemed to sway, knocked from its axis. He looked up, and the entire bridge was tilting, falling. Ilya was screaming. The Prosperine saucer was crying aloud. The warriors of the Magyar Mazan were looking out into the void, ushering in the final battle. His legion was dying, thrust at last into the forged fire of war, out of space, out of time.
I still need you.
The Khan cast his head back, his imperious reserve broken open. He clenched his fist to the heavens and howled out his rage and his grief. and for a sparse moment, there were no more sounds, no more thoughts, only the black thunder of a Primarch's mortal fury.
Kargan!
He called out, as if waking from a nightmare-plagued sleep. The Khan stood and turned towards him.
This is it.
Arvida said.
The path of heaven. He has opened it. There will never be another chance.
The Khan was sluggish, his mind elsewhere. The rest of the bridge crew recovered themselves, restoring systems that had been primed for imminent attack. Out across the Aether-racked vacuum, the enemy was similarly recovering.
My lord, we must take it.
Arvida was conscious of the danger. The change still poured at him, prowling around the edges of his self, watching for any weakness. The portal was the warp in its rawest, deepest form. It would be murderous, but it had to be attempted.
You saw no victory. I did not.
The Primarch stared at the recovering scanner screens, at the enemy fleet that was bearing down on them again, barely halted by the tumult across the fabric of space.
Her choice remains.
Ilya burst between them. The trails of angry tears were wet on her cheeks.
There is no choice.
She hissed, her eyes flashing with anger.
He did this. Honor him. Take the path.
Still, he hesitated. The battleships were turning back towards them. Las cannons had started up again, slicing across the warp-lit abyss. The Endurance had carved its way into range, immolating anything that dared to block its passage. It was on the edge of sight now, unmagnified, colossal. Its coming marked the spoliation and heralded by despair. Only one ship could hope to stand against it. If the Legion turned now, if the order were given, then the retreat would be a bloodbath. Something needed to hold the line.
I have to face him,
the Khan said quietly.
You do not!
Raged Ilya, her grief making her wild.
Lord, if you fight him, the chance will be gone,
urged Arvida.
There will be other days. Not for Tagotai!
Roared the Khan, suddenly bursting into fury.
Not for Shah. My warriors have died for me this day, and every day since my whoreson brother ignited this treachery. I have watched them die year by year, their strength taken from them. No further. I will slay him if I do nothing else.
Arvida waited for the tirade to subside. To withstand the rage of an emperor's son, even one cast into doubt by grief, was no trivial feat. Yet he never moved away.
The way is clear. I can guide us if you let me.
He paused, breathing hard, knowing the peril. The rift was already beginning to close, its edges falling away back into real space as Yasugai's soul was consumed.
Our destiny is on Terra. Your destiny is on Terra.
A tense silence fell across the bridge, broken only by the sounds of battle preparation from the decks below. Ilya waited, desperate, her face white. Torgun and the other Magyar Mazan waited, still armed, making no move. Arvida waited. The Council of Stormseers waited, as did Jubal and the assembled Keshik. The Primarch looked out onto the onrush of the enemy. His hand strayed to the hilt of his tulwar, and still, he said nothing. No one moved. The maelstrom churned, sucking matter into its ravening jaws. The Death Guard came into lance range, and the first tracks of the macro cannon blasts appeared on the augers. The Khan did not look at Arvida. He did not look at Ilya, nor at Namihai, nor Jubal. Eventually, he turned to Taban.
Order all ships into the rift. Full burn,
he said, and his gaze strayed to the real viewports, to where Mortarian's flagship loomed ever larger, a silhouette of decay against the tempest of the warp. The truth will come out. You won't be able to hold the blindfold in place, and once it slips, the fury of those you deceived will be limitless. Yasugai, his oldest friend, his soldier on Chogoris, his stormseer, his compass for his people's way of life. Surrounded on all sides, as the fleet was being ripped apart, Yasugai sacrificed his life, immolating his own body to open a rift into the webway. That ancient pathway, crafted in a time before humanity was primordial soup. Finding the last of his strength, the man, Targetai Yasuge, bade farewell to his closest friends, Ilya, Arvida, and his Kagan, Jagatai. He entrusted Jagatai to protect the Legion, to save them from the hatred and melancholy that was eroding them, and to stand on Terra to defend humanity. The webway opened as Yasugai's soul left this universe. The Legion began to barrel into the rift, but they were set upon. Mortarion was gunning for his brother. Jagatai wanted to fight. The cold rage began bubbling. How many friends had he lost? How many sons have spilled their blood? How much had he sacrificed? How could he let that go unavenged? But Ilya's words reached him. He couldn't let the sacrifice of all of them, Yasugai, Quinn Shah, and all the others be in vain. The White Scars powered towards the portal. The Magyar Mazan, the death squads who had once betrayed their Kagan, earned their redemption, using their lives to buy time for the others to escape. The guilt of letting more of his sons die for him burned in Jagatai, but the Magyar Mazan were smiling, rediscovering their love of battle as they threw themselves upon the Death Lord Mortarion. The White Scars raced through the webway, only to be set upon by their enemy's last attack. The Yakshar, demons of the Chaos God Slanesh tore through. Their disgusting, pale, emaciated, accentuated, twisted forms, the embodiment of depravity. Led by a singular, enormous beast, a greater demon, a keeper of secrets. The creatures of Chogorian myth and nightmare, the entities the Emperor had Malkador claimed were lies, stood before them. Yet these waking nightmares did not find scared little humans before them. They found a force who had been battered, bloodied, and honed by centuries of war, and a near decade of civil conflict. Jagatai and the White Scars had suffered enough, and they unleashed themselves upon the Yakshar. No fear was in any of their hearts as they screamed high Chogoris and for the Kagan. Shiban, Jubal, and the others barreled into the Slaneshi demons, and Jagatai faced the Keeper of Secrets, the greater demon. The duel was a mind-numbing blur, the speed of both of them impossible to follow. Jagatai began to decimate the strange humanoid, chitinous form, but taking equally painful, goring wounds. Breaking his sword upon the sentient nightmare, Jagatai switched to his bare hands, unleashing the cold rage that had terrified even orcs long ago. He screamed in the Yakshar's face, "There is nowhere left to hide. We know you now. We shall hunt you in every plane of reality. We shall cleanse the void, and then we shall cleanse the warp." And then, with his bare hands, he tore the demon's heart from his chest, roaring, "For the Emperor!" The White Scars had survived. Nearly half of them had fallen since the heresy had started. They had lost many friends and brothers, but finally the Legion limped to Terra. The oath had been made, and now it had been honored. And his friends and sons had bought it with their blood, even as an enraged Leman Russ, who Jagatai had ignored his calls for aid at Chondax years ago, couldn't stop him from bringing his legion where they were destined to be. Reuniting with Sanguinius, Rogel Dawn, Leman Russ and Malkador, Jagatai and his men found a moment to gather themselves, to heal from the hell that they had been through. It was also a time to ponder. He had never been close with his father. Their interactions had always been awkward at best. He deep down knew that part of him hated him because he was an emperor, because of the lies he was told to uphold, lies he had to conquer the galaxy to enforce. It was now, with all the cards on the table, that he had begun to understand. Can you not see the fear when someone's telling lies? Can you not see that each poor soul has a heavy cross to bear? It was a war started and perpetuated by lies. The lies about the warp, about why the Emperor had left the Crusade in Horus's hands. Perhaps even the nature of what he and the Primarchs truly were. But beneath it all, it disturbed him, because he had begun to understand. Perhaps the onus is on us, to show them that we care, and lift their spirits, and take away dismay. There was a burden involved. His father lied about the warp, to deny it power. He lied about leaving the Great Crusade to work on the Webway project, a path to sever humanity's reliance on the warp. He had lied to his sons as to not burden them. He carried it, and now Jagatai would have to carry a great burden too. The War Master, after 9 years of brutal conflict, had arrived in the Sol system, and the Siege of Terra had begun. The gods demand entertainment. They demand trial and contest. We could not be allowed to defeat our own demons, for that would be boring. And boredom is the only thing Eternals fear. We are being lined up, one by one, to tear at each other's throats. I do not think they wish to see a victor. I think they wish us to fight forever, locked in madness, until the universe's end. 9 years of war had led to this moment. The War Master's fleet entered the Sol system. The birthplace of humanity would be the stage for the fight for its very existence. The gambit of Leman Russ, the assassination of Horus, had failed. Only Rogel Dawn, Jagatai, Sanguinius, the Emperor, and the billions of ordinary, superhuman and mortal people stood in the traitor's path to victory. Engaging in a layered defense, the loyalists made sure that every inch taken cost the traitors lives and resources. But in turn, this was brought with immense sacrifice. Jubal Noyan Khan, Lord of Summer Lightning, fell in the orbital fleet warfare, slain by the accursed Abaddon, right hand of Horus. Over weeks, the traitor forces smashed through, darkening the skies of Terra. The now corrupted and traitorous Primarch stood over the world that had created them, and they prepared to burn it, to take their so-called father's head. Jagatai, son of Chogoris, the man who hated wars, the man who had destroyed them from Chogoris to the stars, found himself defending them, defending the lie of safety. Millions of people trapped inside the palace had spent the last 9 years fortifying their home. The Imperial Palace had become a maze of bastions, trenchworks, and reinforced banks. Dawn had ensured that it was damn near impregnable. But what good were walls when hell itself had come knocking? The War Master's forces began their assault upon the walls. Within Dawn's layered defense structure, he had forbid Jagatai from venturing outside. But Jagatai refused, How could they just sacrifice the millions of ordinary humans, the men and women who had just taken up a rifle in the defense of their home? To sacrifice them just for time? It was the right strategic move, but devoid of human emotion. Jagatai asked Sanguinius if his prescience saw that his intervention would save lives. The angel replied, many. And then Jagatai told them that that was what he was made for. Jagatai had changed. He was a strategist to equal even Dawn, but the cost of this move was more than just those people's lives. It was their souls. We fought the Great Crusade to free humanity, not to sacrifice it. He was not like the young Khan, who destroyed an entire village when his father's death called for vengeance. He was more than just a conqueror. Isugai had seen it. He was a protector. Jagatai prepared to ride out. His life and his son's lives were in dedication to humanity. They were meant to die in their place. Perhaps Horus was exploiting this, but the cost of abandoning people that could be saved would be worse. Worse than death. Worse than if the traitors were victorious. It was the way we made you. The Emperor had made him a conqueror. Chogoris had made him a Kagan. But he had made himself more. A defender of humanity. The White Scars, the sons of Chogoris, assembled on their jet bikes. The mortal defenders, sitting afraid, crushed by the weight of their imminent death. As monsters approached, heard the rumbling behind them. They looked to the sky and saw them. The superhuman warriors, clad in gleaming white, rushing forward. Like a crashing wave, Jagatai and his sons tore into the Death Guard, finding their enemies' forms reflecting the rotten hearts within. Bloated, rotten, sickly, the Death Guard had become transformed, tainted by the warp. The road of fools. It was in the swarm of bolter fire and cleaved limbs, exploding armor, and sheer hate that Jagatai was knocked from his mount, finding himself surrounded. The Death Guard threw themselves at him, hoping their hulking, bloated forms would drown him. A warp-tainted blade found its way through his armor. He felt the immediate onrush of the disgusting warp power flood his veins, even making a Primarch sick. He began to slow, unable to heal, drowning in a tide of diseased flesh. It was due to the sacrifice of one of his own sons, throwing himself off of his mount, buying space, as he shriveled up with a disease that Jagatai found freedom, releasing the tainted blade and cleaving the diseased marines around him. It was only with the intervention of Sanguinius, his brother, that Jagatai was able to retreat. Many White Scars were gone, dying horrific death, but thousands of ordinary people have been saved due to their sacrifice. The unpredictability of the Khan was something the traitors, even Primarchs, couldn't plan for. The weeks began to phase together. The skies of Terra became dark. Perpetual night reigned as the atmosphere became clogged with spent munition shells and the smell of blood and death. Jagatai even managed to hold the Colossi Gate alongside Constantine Valdor and the Blood Angels Captain Raldoron, but the near sleepless, soul-crushing, constant battle was wearing them all down. Even to Shiban Khan, Jagatai looked emaciated, if that was even possible for a Primarch. They were losing. Millions dead, terror burning, ground being lost. Their hope was fading. Something had to be done, and so Jagatai prepared for a final gambit. They made a ragged pair. The battle-ravaged warlord, his exhausted emissary,
How do you feel?
He asked.
Old.
She said.
I feel very old. How do you feel?
The wisp of a smile flickered over his proud face. No one else would have ever dared to ask him that question. None of the tens of thousands of warriors under his command. None of the hundreds of thousands of auxiliary troops who marched under his banner would ever have presumed.
I feel settled,
he said, thoughtfully.
The pieces are arranged. The calculations have been made. Very soon we shall reach the point where nothing else can be done, save for the action itself.
She found that she didn't really believe that. He had said something similar on the eve of other battles, and she had believed it then. But this was different. The stakes were higher. The likelihood of destruction was overwhelming. This was not a voluntary decision, in any meaningful sense. She had studied the same reports that he had, sat in the same council gatherings. This was desperation, a final spit in the eye of fate. And if any were to benefit from what they did, then it would not be them.
But not quite, of course,
he added wryly.
There is always doubt, even more so now. He clouds everything, and even when you know the origin of the sickness, it is hard to remind yourself that it is artificial, some of it, and can be fought, and must be fought.
It's worse in the sanctum,
Ilya said.
I can imagine.
But that's not all, is it?
She took a swig of water.
I mean, it's not why you came here.
The Khan moved away from her, headed to a shelf where she kept the few old things that had been preserved. The seals, marking her entry into the Departamento Minatorum, the cheap plasteel memento of the triumph she had taken from Ullanor, a priceless dagger that Quinn Shah had given her, never drawn from its sheath.
Never do the easy thing,
he said, looking at the trinkets without really seeing them.
We suffered for that, and now, in a way, this is the easiest thing of all. To stop holding back, cut loose, just like we've been promising we'd do ever since Prospero.
He placed his hands gently on the shelf.
Yesugai saw it. He dreamed of it, he told me. That I'd end my journey fighting a creature of the dark, on a world of embers, and I tried to dismiss it. But it kept coming back to me. That's the problem with the dreams of Stormseers. You wonder if you work to make them true, so despite everything that makes this seem inevitable and right, it might just be me, deep down, tired of compromises, eager to get it settled. The easy thing.
She watched him as he spoke. He stood erect, just as always. In his armor he was still imposing, but she had the sense that there was more hollowness under those plates than there had once been. The warriors of the Legion were all the same. They had been made to keep going, no matter how starved and how damaged they became. A baseline human would give up on a task after a while, but the Emperor's own would just keep fighting until the exceptional machinery of their bodies finally fell apart. Death meant nothing to them. Dishonor meant almost everything. And so it was possible that they could talk of an impossible trial, one which promised nothing but pain on the greatest conceivable scale, as the easy thing.
Why did he tell you of it?
She asked.
I don't know, because it troubled him, I think.
Or because he believed that he had to give you the means to make a choice?
Maybe.
Ilya drank a little more. She was starting to feel more like herself. You could forget what a privilege this was, to be spoken to with such frankness. Over the years, the Khan had done so only occasionally. He sounded now much as he had sounded just before the Catalyst Rift, musing on the past, fretful of the future. So to talk to him felt like a greater service than rounding up tanks.
You know, I never had a family of my own,
she told him.
I never really knew if I wanted one or not. By the time I thought about it seriously, the opportunity had gone. I don't regret it. I did what I needed to do. And just when I thought I'd got to the end of all that, I came to Ullanor and found myself tangled up with you. So I got that family in the end, and you made me furious and anxious and exhausted. All of the things I thought I might have missed.
She smiled sadly to herself.
But the last lesson was the hardest one, because then you all began to die. I was the weakest, but somehow I'm still here. Now I begin to wonder if I might still be here when you're all gone. I'd mourn you if I lasted that long, like I mourned Targatai and Zar and Halji.
She looked up at him.
But I'd be proud, too. Throne I'd be proud. Not because you're the bravest or the best, but because you do this. You ask the question. I taught you how to keep your ammo dumps from running out, but I didn't teach you that. You always did it.
She edged upward in the chair, painfully, feeling her body betray her.
And it is time now, my Khan. This is why we came back.
He came over to her. In order to reach her level, he had to kneel. He extended his great hand, and she put hers out, and each one clasped the other.
I will make you as safe as I can here,
he said.
If they come for the place while you're gone, I'll give them hell.
The end was soon. They could all feel it. The very presence of the demon Primarch Mortarion and his death guard was stripping the hope from their very souls. Despair reigned, from the innocent civilians to the exhausted conscripts, even to the Astartes and Primarchs. This artificial despair would destroy them before Horus had even set foot inside the palace. The 5th Legion assembled. All that was left of them. Only one mortal. Ilya had earned the honor to stand beside them. The Death Guard and Jagatai's foolish, corrupted brother Mortarion had to be defeated, lest this hanging warp despair take them all. They would retake the Lion's Gate spaceport, deny the landing platform to the traitors, and also provide a staging ground for Guilliman and the Lion's legions for when they arrived. The deception had been planted. Dozens of White Scars had allowed themselves to be captured, tortured, and slain in order to ensure the enemy was unprepared, misdirected. A sacrifice that none of them would ever forget. Jagatai, the man who had once fought with freedom in his heart, the man who hated lies, the man who conquered the stars for humanity, knew that he had to face Mortarion, the pox-riddled, elevated demon Primarch, and that, in most likelihood, he would not survive. Thousands assembled, the White Scars, thousands of mortals, and the last tank regiment on Terra, and they set out to battle. Utilizing an enormous mobile ship platform as cover, the Loyalists, like a procession, walked towards death, gunning for the Death Guard and the traitors. Fire and ash roaring around them as they trudged through the violated miles of Terran Earth. The mortal people were afraid. Of course they were. Reports came in of things claimed to be Xenos, but the utter, gut-wrenching sickness that sung through their bodies when they caught glimpses left doubt. Before war calls, when men and women roar with pride in their heart, how quickly that bravery melts when fire, smoke, ash, and the literal dread of death is before you. You lie to yourself and say that you are brave. Miles upon miles, the Loyalist contingent trudged until finally they met them. the bloated, disgusting caricatures of Astartes, the Death Guard, with their sickly washed armor. All of them tightened their rebreather equipment lest they take in the disgust around them. Jagatai and the Fifth roared into the Lionsgate spaceport, fighting in gut-wrenching, bloody combat for every inch of land, until finally he saw him, the enormous, pus-riddled, rusted, mouldy thing that was his brother. There was so much hate between them. The duel was brutal. Clashes that shattered bones rang out. Blood and sparks flew in display too fast, too apocalyptic to register with human eyes. Mortarion began to taunt his brother, decrying his weakness, telling him that he had shown him the truth of the gods of chaos, the truth that had now made him immortal, and he had run like he always had. The corrupted Death Lord was now leagues above Jagatai in strength, so much that even his Primarch body couldn't endure the onslaught. Jagatai became a bloody mess. Wounds poured from all over his smashed form. His cold rage was not enough. At the edge of death, Jagatai stumbled. Mortarion again taunted him. He had expected him to dance, to show his pathetic sword-wielding abilities. But he hadn't. He had just taken it. He had taken the blows. With blood choking in his mouth, a cracked visage looked back and smiled. I absorbed the pain. The terminus est. You gave up. I did not. My endurance is superior. The Death Lord froze. The cocky, cracked visage, the pus-ridden, corrupted face of Mortarion contorted, turning into the epitome of rage as Jagatai laughed, the wheezing howl of a dead man. The words cut deeper than any blade ever could, lifting his broken form from the floor. Jagatai seized the opportunity, unleashing everything he had left, finally dancing as he tore ribbons of flesh from his corrupted brother. Faster, faster, Jagatai moved, his heart fueled only by the spirit of Chogoris, the cold rage for all he and his sons had suffered, and for humanity. Finally, the moment came when Mortarion plunged his scythe deep into the Khan's chest, bursting through his back in a shower of blood. Jagatai locked himself onto it, dragging his body down the length of the scythe with his bare hands, until he was finally face to face with his twisted brother, and with the last of his strength, he tore his brother's head from his shoulders, banishing the demon back into the warp. I sometimes imagined how I would feel if we ever came up against a foe we could not defeat, where nothing remained but to fall back, again and again, weakening further with every encounter, watching the lifeblood slowly drain out of those around us as the noose tightened. I hoped and believed that I would do so as they did, and keep fighting. The Kagan, the Warhawk of Chogoris, lied broken on the world where he was created, under black skies, as humanity fought for its very existence. Ilya, general and confidant of the Primarch, came raging in on a land speeder. The closer she came, she heard the shouting over the explosions and bolter fire. Damag, Damag. The word roared from the throats of the White Scars, and in an instant she knew what it meant as the horror washed over her. Damag, Damag. The sons of Chogoris cried. Death. It was the war cry of a warrior's death, as Mortarion's rotten soul had been banished back to the warp. Both the Death Guard and the White Scars felt something overtake them, A soul-crushing hollowness washed over the white scars. They dropped their weapons. They felt sick. Their Kagan, their father, was gone. Just as quickly as the grief had come, the rage followed. Damarg, they cried into the air as their souls sung for their fallen Kagan. And like a tide of hate, they washed over the confused Death Guard. Ilya found her way through, finally laying eyes upon the sight that broke her. Was it even a corpse? This mountain of battered flesh that had once been the Warhawk of Chogoris. Jagatai, the defender of humanity, gave his life. The underestimated, the forgotten, the misunderstood had made the sacrifice. The oath had been made, and now it was fulfilled. Touching her hand to the only part of her friend that was not gore and blood, Ilya wept. But as the despair almost took her, she felt something. She asked those around her to check for a pulse, but there was nothing. But she knew in her heart that she had felt something. Malcador. She had to get him to Malcador. Perhaps there was a chance. Dragging the corpse of their lord up, they made a desperate gambit back to the palace as the remaining White Scars held the spaceport. No more would they attack and retreat. This was where he had fallen, their father. This was sacred ground, and they would die in its defense. Reaching Malcador's side, Jagatai was taken, placed within a mysterious device. There his body lay, as the battle for the fate of humanity roared on above. Jagatai lived. He had given his life to the Imperium, for the father whom he had never loved, against a brother that he did. He had defended an empire that never wanted him, against an army that would have taken him in a heartbeat. When he awoke, the universe had changed forever. The loyalists had won. Horus had been slain. The traitors scattered, but Sanguinius was dead. The Emperor was crippled, interned upon the Golden Throne. The dream, the great vision had been murdered. Jagatai's treacherous brothers had seen to that. Magnus, Horus, and Sanguinius, the only brothers he had ever loved, were gone or corrupted. Usugai, Gyuhun, Hasek, Quin Shah, Jubal, and as the decades passed, even Ilya, he had outlived them all. The man who had just wanted to embrace the freedom of conquest under the azure skies of Chogoris had sacrificed so much. The man who'd hated the lies had suffered the most because of them. He had found fraternity, obligation, but for those who had felt that obligation too were gone. Only grief left in its wake. The man who had feared decrepitude and the lie of safety that wars provided had given his life to defend them. Never do the easy thing. You are their protector. Perhaps in all this suffering, he had finally found the one thing he had never set out to accomplish. Understanding his father, the Emperor, a man whom Malcador long ago had told him he had sacrificed more than anyone, because that is what is required to walk the path as a defender of humanity. A new era had begun. The Imperium had survived, and with the Reformation under the direction of Rabute Guilliman, the legions were divided, broken into 1,000-man chapters, so that no individual could ever wield such power again. Something Jagatai accepted in his head, but found tumultuous in his heart. To divide the people of Chogoris. He was a unifier. That was his reason for conquest. But at the risk of another civil war, the surviving legions and Primarchs agreed. For 70 years, Jagatai led the White Scars, following the heresy. pushing the traitors all the way to the Eye of Terra, that disgusting warp rift. It would be at the Battle of Corisil 5, where Jagatai was unleashing himself upon a Drukhari force that had assailed Chogoris during the Heresy, that he was lost, disappearing within a webway portal, surrounded by his elite Keshik. For 10,000 years, the songs and battle cries of the sons of Chogoris have lauded their great Kagan, awaiting for the day the quiet barbarian, the conqueror, the oath keeper, the son of Chogoris, the Warhawk of Terra, the defender of humanity, returns.
Warriors of Chogoris, brothers of the Great Tribe, the Star Hunt calls you. Do you not hear it? The battle's red edge is your home, the respect of your kinsmen, your herd. Plunge into the enemy's breast like a blade, cut out his heart, and you will know fulfillment. The Emperor has given us strength. In return, we give him victory.